We are back on the Zero Hour. In this segment, we are going to be talking about Social Security and specifically about expanding it. Our next guest is Max Richtman, who is president of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. He has a very distinguished background, 16-year veteran of Capitol Hill, one of the nation's most influential senior advocacy and education membership organizations is his, the NCP-SSM. He has drafted legislation to establish a consumer price index for the elderly, which is an excellent idea. He's a frequent commentator, frequently interviewed on these topics. And Max, until I read your biography, I did not know that you are a graduate of Georgetown University Law School, as is my daughter. But thank you for coming on the program.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I guess I'm in good company if I'm a graduate along with your daughter.
And so is she. Thank you for saying that. And listen, you've been working now on the issue. We've seen a big shift in the whole. We've both been working on the Social Security issue for some time. You much more prominently and in a much more focused way. But we've certainly seen a shift in the battle in the last year or so, haven't we?
Yes, we have, and I think, Richard, we've had some major successes in the last year. We, as you know, opposed a plan that was concocted by the White House and the leadership, Republican leadership in the Congress, that would have essentially cut Social Security by changing the COLA formula, the chain CPI. That we've both talked and written about. And it was assumed for quite a while that this was going to get through because the president was behind it. It looked like that the Congress was going to accept it, and the American people spoke. And that proposal, for the time being, is not moving anywhere. So I consider that a big accomplishment. A lot of groups were involved in that. A lot of key members of Congress were involved in that effort, particularly Senator Bernie Sanders and Keith Ellison and the other members of the Progressive Caucus.
Well, absolutely. And as a result, now the conversation has shifted. And I would characterize it, but I'm curious to know whether you would agree. I would say, in a sense, the debate has shifted from one of defense to one of offense on Social Security.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. So instead of fighting and resisting this chain CPI cut, we're actually talking about how to expand the program and its benefits. And I know you guys have come out in support of the Harkins-Sanchez bill. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would, please.
Well, we have embarked on a campaign. We refer to it as Boost Social Security Now, and that's the name of the website as well for this campaign. And you're right. We have been playing defense for quite some time now, and there are some who were reluctant to shift the nature of the battle and start playing offense. But we need to begin, and we have with this campaign, talk about efforts to really reflect the growing public support to expand Social Security. That's why we have endorsed Senator Harkin's proposal S567 and a companion in the House, H.R. 3118, Congresswoman Linda Sanchez's bill, that improves Social Security. It does so in a number of ways. First of all, the cost of living adjustment issue that we've been talking about, instead of fighting a chain CPI that would have reduced the COLA, would reduce benefits over time pretty dramatically. This legislation would employ a more accurate consumer price index measure for the COLA, and it's called a CPIE, Consumer Price Index for the elderly. There is a component of the legislation that raises the minimum benefit by $70 a month. It's phased in over a couple years,
So before we move off the,
yep.
the cost of living or COLA adjustment, I just want our listeners to understand that this debate was essentially the change CPI would change the way that figure is calculated and make the increases along with the cost of living lower by basically saying if people are buying cheaper goods, they can't buy meat anymore, whatever, then the benefit goes down. And what you're proposing with and many of our groups are proposing in terms of the CPI for the elderly is that in fact cost of living has been rising more steeply for the elderly because they use things like transportation and healthcare that have been historically rising at a greater level, right? That's a fair summary?
Exactly, Richard. You explained it beautifully. You know what? Our position is if a cost of living adjustment, if the purpose of a cost of living adjustment for Social Security beneficiaries is to make sure beneficiaries don't lose ground because of inflation, then we need to have the most accurate measure possible. And in order to do that, those folks at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Department of Commerce need to look at the kinds of goods and services that seniors rely on and put the proper weight on that market basket of goods and services, and not what they do now, which is rely on how inflation is impacting a wage earner. The current formula, it's not as bad as the change CPI, but it also is flawed because it does not focus on the buying patterns of seniors on Social Security. It focuses on the buying patterns of wage earners. So, we were looking at the possibility of going from a flawed formula, the current one, to an even more flawed formula, the change CPI. What the legislation that Senator Harkin and Linda Sanchez in the House have proposed is would move us towards a more accurate measure of inflation and apply that to the COLAs that seniors so much rely on. And finally, the last thing I wanted to make a point of is how are we going to pay for all this? Having a larger COLA, having a higher minimum benefit, we're going to pay for it and extend the life of Social Security, which is in no danger, by the way, any immediate danger, but extend it even beyond 20 years that the trustees talk about, by lifting the payroll tax cap, the limit on FICA contributions. This is something we have at the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare have been engaged in for quite a long time, but now there is actual legislation that would raise that cap again in a gradual way, which will bring more money into the program, pay for additional benefits. We would go beyond some of the legislation, and we think there's a growing need for some other improvements in benefits that would be paid for by lifting the payroll tax cap.
So right now, if someone is earning up to 100, I think it adjusts over time, but I think right now it's about $117,000.
That's correct.
If you're earning under that amount, you're paying the payroll tax on your full earnings. But if you're earning $1 million a year, you're only paying it on roughly 10% of your income, and that's what this would change.
That's what this would change. And I think there are a lot of ways this could be done. There are proposals that would keep it at the current limit. It changes a little bit every year, but keep the cap on the current track and then start again collecting FICA tax at $250 or $300. Some members of Congress think that politically that may be more feasible to accomplish. But the point is, there are ways to extend. We often hear about Social Security being broke. That's not true. It has a surplus, is able to pay everybody every penny they're entitled to for the next 20 years. At that point, there's a shortfall that needs to be addressed, and we acknowledge that. But the way to do it is to bring more revenue into the program in a fair way, and not to cut benefits or raise the retirement age. And you just gave the example. Why should someone that's making $117,000 or anything below that pay FICA tax on all their wages, but someone who's making $1 million or 10 million or 100 million not pay a little bit more on their payroll, on their wages, to bring more money into the program.
So in the minute or so we have left, these are excellent proposals that I think most of us support. Polls show most Americans support. How good are the chances? You've been around Washington a long time. What are the prospects for the Harkin proposal?
I would be surprised if anything could be passed in the House and the Senate of this nature and signed by the president this close to an election. I think this is a campaign that's going to go on for a while. I think it will become an issue in some congressional races, and it is more likely that we'll have some traction and probably some modifications of Senator Harkin's bill. Of course, sadly, he won't be in the Congress anymore. He's retiring this year, but there are plenty of members of Congress who will take up that cause. I've spent some time recently with the two senators from Hawaii, Senator Schatz and Senator Begich of Alaska, and they're committed to a improved, expanded Social Security program and social insurance safety net. So I think this is something that we're going to hopefully get some traction on during the rest of this congressional session and get some action next year.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and updating us on this. Max Richtman is the president of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Max, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, RJ, for inviting me.
You bet. And we will be back after this break talking with a climate scientist about deceptions on climate change and talking with Carolyn Fiddler about interesting, unusual, and intriguing action at the state legislature level. We will be right back. I'm RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.